Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. The topic for tonight's discussion is to focus in on the other models of the degrees of competition that a firm could be in fact associated with. We talk about it as the monopoly model, and that's remember, all the way at the end of the spectrum. That's like there's only one firm in the industry. But this applies to every firm that has a downward sloping demand curve. So with the exception of those firms that are in perfect competition, what we did last time, that have a horizontal demand curve, all other companies are going to have a downward sloping demand curve. So basically, this model applies to almost any business firm, whether it's monopolistic competition, oligopoly, or monopoly. As long as the demand's downward sloping, this analysis is in fact correct. And that's why I like to call it not the monopoly model, but the price searcher model. It's the same chapter and the same information, but it applies to all those firms, not just to the monopoly model. So as we said, the firm now faces, and remember this is about the firm now, not the industry, but the individual firm. And the firm faces a downward sloping demand curve, and we know that traces out the quantities that they're able to sell at each price. But for them, it means in order to sell more, they have to lower the per unit price in doing that. And we can calculate total revenue on the diagram as we've done before. If in fact the price is 10, I only sell one shirt and I take in $10 of total revenue. If I lower my price to 9, I sell a second shirt. And that's the only way I can do it based on the data we've been given. So I lower my price to 9, but I have to have the same price for everybody, at least in this initial analysis. And so at $9, I sell an additional shirt. That's an additional $9, but I lose $1 of that I was receiving from the first individual. So total revenue goes from $9 to $18, and that's the change that takes place. If I lower it again to $8, I sell an additional shirt. 3/8 are 24. Lower it to 7, I sell an additional shirt. Total revenue is still going up, and I get to $6, and total revenue is 30. It's $6 times 5 units being sold. But now notice something about moving from $6 to $5. At $6, I sell 5 shirts, so there's my total revenue. If I lower my price to 5, I sell 6 shirts, so I take in an additional $5. But I've given up $5 of revenue from the previous items I was selling at $6. Everybody see it? I'm gaining this area over here, but I'm losing this area right in here. So I'm gaining this area, but I'm losing that area. So at that point, total revenue is the same. 5 times 6 is 30. 6 times 5 is also 30. So I can then calculate the additional revenue, which is what marginal revenue is, associated with each additional unit sold. And for the first unit, marginal revenue is the same as price. If I charge a price above $10, I don't sell any. So the first shirt that I sell, marginal revenue is the $10 that I in fact receive. At $9, we noted that the change in total revenue is only $8. It's an additional 9 minus 1. So the change in total revenue or marginal revenue is $8. For the third shirt, it is in fact $6. Excuse me. 3/8 are 24 and 4/7 are 28. And then it's $4, and then for the fifth shirt, it's $2, and then the sixth shirt, as we said, it's 0, because that last shirt doesn't bring any additional revenue coming in. In fact, if you look at selling for $5 and selling 6 shirts, so I get $30 in. If I lower the price to $4, I sell an additional shirt, but 4/7 are 28. So beyond that 6th unit, marginal revenue is actually negative. The additional revenue is not positive, it's negative. It goes from $30 down to $28. And so marginal revenue, as we said, is below the line. It's negative in that area. So I can draw the marginal revenue function as a line graph And the way to see how you can draw that correctly has to do with the geometry of a straight line demand curve. At the midpoint of a straight line demand curve is where marginal revenue is zero. Think back to my example. It was between $6 and $5. We said that's where marginal revenue is zero. So the upper half of the curve, marginal revenue is positive. It's above the axis. And that is the elastic portion of the demand curve. If you remember back to doing elasticity, the upper half of the curve is elastic. What does that mean? It means when I lower price, total revenue goes up. Remember from elasticity? If demand's elastic, I lower price, total revenue increases. If total revenue increases, then marginal revenue is positive, because as I sell the next unit, I'm getting additional amounts of revenue in. At the midpoint of the straight line, marginal revenue is zero. And then beyond that, you're in the inelastic range. And remember, in that range, raising price increases total revenue, meaning that the additional revenue associated with selling those units is in fact negative. Total revenue is going down. So you can always accurately draw this diagram, which you want to be able to do to solve certain kinds of problems graphically, by number one, setting marginal revenue equal to price at the intersection of the vertical axis. Find the midpoint of demand, which is also the midpoint of that line segment because it's a right triangle, and that's where it's zero. And then just draw your line right through that those 2 points. And whatever slope you have, that'll be an accurate representation of marginal revenue for that particular demand curve. I thought there was a chart. I guess there's not. I thought that I had a chart showing marginal revenue, but I guess I don't have it. Okay. So we now know what demand looks like. From that, the seller can calculate his marginal revenue, the anticipated additional revenue for selling different units. And then the question is, what's the right rate of output to maximize profit? Same question we asked before. Well, we know mathematically that I want to produce every unit that adds more to revenue than it adds to cost. Just think about it. If it adds more to revenue than it adds to cost, it's contributing towards a positive profit. So I want to produce all those units. I don't want to produce anything that has an additional cost greater than the additional revenue. And so the optimal point is the same as it was before. The optimal rate of production, and therefore price for this firm, is the quantity where marginal cost just equals marginal revenue. You've produced all the units that add more to revenue than they add to cost. You haven't produced any units over here that would add more to cost than they add to revenue.
Could you repeat, please, what the optimal rate of production is?
Yes, where marginal revenue equals marginal cost.
Thank you.
And in the abbreviations, it's MR equals MC.
Thank you.
Sure. So that's the best the firm can do. Once you've solved for that, and in the graph, once you've drawn that in, the rest of the diagram doesn't mean anything. The rest of the diagram doesn't mean anything because you know that's the best you can possibly do for the single price seller. The price would be the price up on the demand curve because that's the price from which you calculated marginal revenue. And that's also the price that will sell the quantity that you want to produce. QM is the best quantity to maximize profit. PM is the price that will sell just, in fact, that quantity. So that's the monopoly price. That's what the M stands for. But we notice something that's different from the perfect competition model, and that is that the price is above the marginal cost of production. Price is bigger than marginal cost of production. Now, Leanne.
Price is only bigger than cost in monopoly?
Yeah, it's because, let me go back to perfect competition. Demand was horizontal, and that meant that marginal revenue was the same as price. Remember, every unit you could get an additional dollar when you produced and sold it. So when demand is horizontal, perfect competition, price is the same as marginal revenue, right? Good. Now, once we get to this downward sloping curve, we can see that here marginal revenue is less than price, right? As we talked about, right? Well, the best rate of production is to compare each unit and how much it adds to cost, how much it adds to revenue. So that's what you did when you moved out and decided that was the best rate of production. For all the units before that, marginal revenue, remember it's measured as a height above each unit, is bigger than the additional cost. So you'd want to produce those. You wouldn't want to produce beyond that, as I said, because their marginal cost marginal cost is I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong thing. Marginal cost is higher than marginal revenue. Marginal cost is bigger than marginal revenue. So I don't want to produce out there. I want to produce all of these. So that's why that's the solution.
And by price, you're referring to like the midpoint?
No. It's the price that you're charging on to the customer. It's the price on the demand function.
It'll always be more than the marginal cost?
Yes, as long as demand's downward sloping. And the reason is because if demand's downward sloping, marginal revenue is less than price. And you produce where marginal revenue equals marginal cost, right? Okay? Okay, good. And I mean, I went through this quickly, but the reason marginal revenue is less than price, remember, is when I lower the price to sell that next unit, I lose revenue from the previous people because they were all paying me $8 before. Now, if I'm charging $7, I'm losing all those dollars from them. I'm gaining the new dollars that I'm getting in when I sell the additional unit, right? But because it's what I'm gaining minus what I'm losing, it's going to be less than price. Okay, good. So we know, as I said, for this curve, price is above marginal cost. Now, the term market power means, and you need to write this down because I don't think it's in the slides, and I think it's in the class notes, but I'm not positive. The term market power, and sometimes it's called monopoly power, it's the same thing, refers to the ability to charge a price that is above marginal cost. Market power by itself just means the ability to charge a price that's greater than marginal cost of production. Consequently, the higher the price is relative to marginal cost, the greater the market power of the firm, the more power that firm has in the marketplace with respect to competitors. Carol?
The ability to charge a price above what?
Above marginal cost. So let's think of the product as being Microsoft's operating system, Windows 10. I think isn't that the latest one for the PCs? Think about what price do they charge for that? It's like $90 just for an upgrade, right? If you have Windows 9, I think it's $90 to move up. If you are building your own computer, though, and you go to Microsoft and say, I want to buy the operating system from you, I think it's like $230. But either one of the prices works for my analysis. Okay, so price is somewhere $100 to $200, right? Good. Now, think about the marginal cost to Microsoft of producing and selling one more CD that has the operating system on it. We're thinking about marginal cost, right? Well, there's the cost of the CD, let's say that's 2 cents. There's a cost of burning the data onto the CD, let's say that's 2 cents. It comes in a plastic box, let's say that's 2 cents, so we're up to 6 cents now. And they have a tricolored picture on it, let's say that's an additional 2 cents. So the marginal cost to Microsoft is like 8 cents, and the price is like $90 or $200. They clearly have a lot of market power, and they clearly would be called a monopolist. But remember, there are always substitutes. That's one of those phrases you want to carry around with you, right? The monopoly model says it's only one firm. But that's like a benchmark. That's like a make-believe model. Every firm faces competition. They might not face a lot of competition, like the case of Microsoft, but there are always substitutes available. Substitutes for Windows are what? Yeah, OS X or whatever it is now for the Mac, and then there's Unix, which is the open source system that's on the internet, and so they're always competitors, but they have a lot of market power. So price is way above marginal cost. My girlfriend's birthday was not too long ago, and she wanted a new purse, and I think I told the story, did I? No, when I was doing, oh, good. She wanted a new purse for her birthday, so of course we went to what store? Who has the best purses? No.
Neiman Marcus.
What?
Neiman
No,
Marcus.
those are the brands. What store?
Macy's or Bloomingdale's.
Hermes. Isn't it Hermes?
Oh.
I know, but Hermes
Well, yeah.
is a brand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, good. So we go to Hermes.
Well, that's
I'd forgotten
nice
the name.
boyfriend.
Right. Well, we just went. I didn't say I bought anything. So we went in, and they had this really beautiful bag. It was like a little log, and it was leather, and it had big stitching on it, and then it had a gold clasp and handle, and it was really very attractive. And I turned the price tag over, and it was $800, and it was like, oh, geez. And so I said to her, honey, Macy's carries handbags. Macy's is a good store. They carry handbags. So I went to Macy's, and they had a bag. And by the way, the color at Hermes was
Orange.
was rouge. It was a red bag, rouge. We went to Macy's, and they had a bag that was very similar, and then it had stitching, and it had a gold handle. And I turned the price tag over, and it was $400. Well, clearly the other bag was better than this bag, right? It was a better bag, but it wasn't better by $400 in terms of cost. So I estimated, and that's why I have this relationship up. I estimated that for them, maybe their cost was $400, and they were selling it for $800. So they clearly have market power. They have a really great reputation in the marketplace, and they do. They have really quality stuff, and they have quality people who really know stuff, and they're all attractive, and the store's attractive, and all that kind of stuff. And it's $800, all right? So I said to her, you know, Target has handbags, and by the way, the color there, it was rouge, and then it was what was it? I can't think what the name was there. So we went to Target, and sure enough, there's a bag that's very similar, right? It's it's the same size, and it's made out of pleather as opposed to actual leather, and it was like $74, right? So which one did I give her?
The $74.
Oh, come on. That's minus 2 points right there. No, she got the $800 bag. I'm not stupid, people, right?
My boyfriend would give me the $74.
Well, and you should change boyfriends.
No.
Right. That's why you're taking this course, so you can get better quality people. You can tell them this story. Clearly, they have market power because, and it's not Hermes, it's Coach, is what I was thinking about, Coach handbags. They clearly have market power because the price looks like it's about twice marginal cost in that situation. If you think about the demand for Scott paper towels, and I must have done this when I did elasticity, there are a lot of close substitutes. Remember, that is a case of monopolistic competition. Lots of differentiated products that are similar but not identical. Some are more absorbent, some are colored, some are these kinds of things. But there's a whole lot of close substitutes. So in fact, you can see that price is very close to marginal cost. There's not much market power there because demand is downward sloping to that degree. If you went to the price taker model, the one we did last time, the most competitive case, remember the assumptions. The economist assumes there are thousands and thousands of buyers and sellers. The products are identical between them. You can't even tell who produced it when it's at market. There's perfect information, zero information cost. Everybody knows everything. You know the price, you know the quality, you know where it is. And there's zero cost of entering or exiting. Those are the conditions for perfect competition. In that case, as we just said in review, the price is the same as marginal revenue. You produce where marginal cost equals marginal revenue, same thing we're doing now, but this firm has no market power because price is the same as marginal cost. Y'all with me? Good. So as you look at those diagrams, you can see the changing nature of competition and the changing amounts of market power. Monopoly has that really big upcharge, then you have still pretty good size, then you have a very small one, and then you have zero at the most competitive model. Yeah, Leanne?
Where the marginal cost and the demand, that the box that it makes, that's the total revenue, right?
Price times quantity.
Yeah.
Right. And then marginal cost, in fact, that's great because you're thinking about exactly the point that I wanted to make. If you go back to this model of Microsoft that has all this market power, and we said the price is 200 and the marginal cost is like 6 cents. And so you might be, the average person on the street would tell you, well, they're making profits. They're making monopoly profits. I mean, they're monopoly. They have to make monopoly profits, right? They're monopoly. The answer is wrong. Because, remember, profit is total revenue minus what? Total cost. And total cost includes not only variable cost, but fixed cost. Now, think about Microsoft. To develop that product, they have thousands of engineers. They work on it for years. They get really high salaries. They're up in wherever their park is for their property. And they have all kinds of equipment, and they test things and so forth. So they spend millions and millions of dollars in fixed cost to develop that system. So the summary point I'm trying to make to you is even though a firm may be called a monopoly, it is not guaranteed to be making profits. Y'all with me? There's no guarantee of profits. You say, wow, look at that. No. In fact, you guys have seen this in your own lifetime. You've seen stores where there was a really big upcharge, right? Like really fancy stores, and they had a really big upcharge, and they went bankrupt. Why? Well, because they had a big ratio here, but they weren't making enough money to cover their fixed cost. And so there's no guarantee of being a monopoly or having lots of market power. There's no guarantee of profits whatsoever. In fact, I want to look at that now in terms of firms potentially entering into competition and what is the effect on the firm's profitability. So profit, as we said, is price relative to average cost. And we recall from our cost curve diagram, we know marginal cost is going to intersect average cost at the minimum of the bowl, at the minimum of the bowl. But the cost curve is totally separate from the demand curve. That's two different data sets. Demand is what you buyers are willing to buy from me at different prices. Cost comes from the back room. That depends on, the technique of production and all those kinds of things. So average cost could be, okay, this one's working. Average cost could be up here. Could be intersecting marginal cost there. It could be here. It could be down here. It's totally independent of demand, of what demand looks like. So we don't know if the firm's making a profit till I bring in average cost from which I can calculate total cost. It was the point Leanne was addressing. So I bring in my average cost curve. I can draw it in the same space. And let's say, suppose it is where it is now. So I'm producing QM. So my per unit cost is the height of average cost at that rate of production. To get total cost, I would take the average and then multiply by quantity. The same way I did to get total revenue. I took the price multiplied by the number of units. So to get total cost, I take average cost multiplied by the units that I'm in fact producing. So the bottom area, the total revenue would be PMQM, the whole rectangle. The bottom area would be total cost, average cost times quantity. And so profit would be the difference between those two. In fact, it is price minus average cost times quantity is another way of thinking about it. Price that I sell it for minus my per unit cost of production times how many units I've sold. would give me the profit that I'm making for the firm. Now, if a firm is making positive profits, what can you expect in the marketplace? Anybody? If a firm is making a lot of profits, what can you predict would happen? Huh? Well, revenue above cost, we know that. I don't know what high means, but we know that. But what response would you see in the marketplace? People spot somebody making profits. People who have similar resources are going to do what? Come into competition, right? Come into competition. The story I like to tell is years ago, there was a firm that produced microwave transmitters. Raytheon was the firm. And this is back in the 50s. And if you go downtown and go up on the buildings, you'll see a big rectangle that looks like a stereo speaker. And if you look 5 miles over, you'll see another one facing it. So you'll see these, throughout downtown. Those are microwave relays. And this one is broadcasting like 10,000 signals to that one. And it's carrying 10,000 data streams. And that one is broadcasting back to this one, and it's carrying some unbelievable number. I'm very good at visualizing things, but I'll tell you, I can't visualize how this invisible wave carries information. I don't know that much about physics, but my guy said, well, you just take the wave and then you put the data on it, or I don't know. But they do. That's how all your internet stuff goes, how all the telephone calls have gone for a long time, through these microwave transmitters. At that time, the transmitter was easily as big as this room. The transmitter machine was as big as this room, and it was run on vacuum tubes, and it was very expensive. It cost like $1 million, which means in today's dollars it would be like 50 million, something like that. So the chief engineer, and this is a true story, chief engineer went down to his guys in the lab who were developing a new microwave creating tube, vacuum tube. And so the guy turned it on, and then he started talking to him about what it does and how much it costs to make and all those kinds of things. So he was evaluating this new potential input. And he went up to his office afterwards, and he was wearing a jacket. And he had a Hershey bar in the inside pocket. And so he took out the Hershey bar, and it was partially melted. It was partially melted. And he was like, he's a scientist, engineer. So he said, I've worn this jacket lots of times in hotter weather than this, and I've never had it melt. So something else is going on. So where was I? I was down in the lab, standing next to a microwave vacuum tube. So he thought, okay, maybe that's the source. Although they didn't know this at the time. And he went out and bought a little tiny bag of popping corn, unpopped popping corn. And he went back to the lab, and he leaned it up against the tube, and then he told the technician, okay, turn it on again. Well, think if you were the technician, right? The guy comes in with a bag of popcorn, like, oh, he's lost it, right? This is crazy, right? So they turn it on, nothing happens, and then a couple kernels pop. And he realizes that somehow the microwaves are causing the food to cook, to cook. Now we know today what goes on. Microwaves cause the molecules to jiggle, and jiggling the molecules causes the heat. And the food cooks from the inside out. It heats up in the inside and then outward. So the next board meeting, this is Raytheon, microwave stuff. The next board meeting, he goes to report. And he said, it might be possible to make a microwave oven. Now, if you were on the board of directors, you'd think this guy's lost his mind. It costs millions of dollars to build the transmitter. What are you talking about, right? So obviously it was not possible then. But as science continued, we moved from vacuum tubes to chips. We moved from vacuum tubes to transistors. That made it smaller and cheaper. Then we moved to chips. That made it smaller and cheaper. Eventually, it became possible to think about building a transmitter and a receptacle and perhaps get it down to what you could actually sell it for. So they invested in all this research, and they didn't know if it's going to work or not. And the first ones they developed were much larger. They were for restaurants. They were like the size of a refrigerator. And they sold for like $4,000 and stuff. And restaurants would do it because I can cook food quickly to serve to my customers. And the real problem they had then was how to convince the general public that it was safe to use these things. I mean, you're cooking with invisible rays, right? Like X-rays and stuff. And they put demonstration units out at various areas. One was the North Campus of UCLA, and they put it up, and it was next to a standard thing where you put the money in and take the food out, vending machine. And they had croissants and ham and cheese sandwiches and a couple other items. So you'd buy the food there, and then you'd open the door, and it had a handle like a giant freezer, right? Like this gigantic handle that you had to open. And then you'd place it in, and then you'd close it and lock this handle. And then you'd push buttons that had pictures on them. So here's a picture of a croissant or a ham and cheese sandwich. So you press the button. Even then, it hummed. It made a humming sound. And the handle locked, so you couldn't possibly get it open while it was generating microwaves. And then when it was through, it actually dinged, much like they still do today. And then you'd open it, and you'd reach in, and the sandwich would be hot, and the whole inside of the oven was cold. Now that, you talk about, science and stuff, right? People were really scared of it. People were really scared of it. They thought it would make you go blind. People said, "Oh, you'll go blind. The microwaves will make you go blind," and so forth. But eventually, they managed to get enough advertising out, enough informational discussions, and they started to make positive economic profits. The branch was called Amana. They were the first ones to come out with one for the home, and it was still very expensive, but they actually started making positive profits. As soon as they made those profits, what happened? Anybody?
Let's go down.
Good. Who came in against them? Who would you predict would come in to competition to produce a kitchen appliance? Someone who has similar resources, right? Someone who knows how to produce kitchen equipment. General Electric, right? KitchenAid. Samsung. Samsung knew more about the microwave transmission than they did about the appliances, but they came in as well. And so over time, the response is new firms are going to enter the industry. As they do, the result is that demand will decline for your product, will decline and become more elastic. But as long as there's positive profits being reported, there's an incentive for more firms to enter that industry. So now it is a commodity. If you want a microwave, go to Best Buy. There is a wall to choose from. There's a little tiny one for $49 for sandwiches. Then there's the regular size. Then there's one that has the blade that rotates. Then there's one that has presets for popcorn and other stuff. And then there's a big one for cooking turkeys, this gigantic microwave. The rate of return on those is approximately 7% right now. Small appliance rate of return, about 6 to 7%, which means zero economic profits. Once again, remember, economic profits mean what? Above and beyond the normal rate of return, right? Remember, economic profits are above and beyond the normal rate because the normal rate is included in economic total cost. Remember, opportunity cost was part of that total cost that you were subtracting from total revenue. So over time, competition will drive the price down, reducing demand, reducing price until you reach this situation. Here, price is the same as average cost, including opportunity cost. And so now the firm is making zero economic profits. They're still making a rate of return, normal rate of return, 7% for that degree of risk in the marketplace, but they're not making economic profits as a result of the new firms entering. Yeah.
On the test, there was a question about, I think it was economic profits and if it was beneficial to society, or, you know what I'm talking about?
There was a question about why is the market efficient or something, and the answer was because it maximizes the gains from trade. There was a question like that. Now, I don't know. But I think there was a question on there, going back to our discussion about the firm, because that was before the second midterm, was our discussion about the fact that because the owner receives profits, employees make more money. There was a question like that. Or if you make them pay for health care, wages will go down. Those were two questions that were in that particular area. But it's really important to understand that. If you ask the average guy in the street, if this guy's making a profit, is that better for the employees? And they'll say no. No. If he's making a profit, he must be buying them cheap or something, right? But we know from our understanding about my running a co-op and stuff, when the owner gets to keep the profit, number one, the employees can get a guaranteed salary, whether you're successful or not, as long as you're still in business. And then secondly, productivity goes up because the owner is going to monitor the employees. They're going to work to their potential, which means they're more valuable to the employer. Remember, this employer is in competition with all the other employers out there to bid for your services. So wages go up as a result of that kind of organization. Now, we talked about efficiency for the marketplace when we were doing perfect competition. And there's market demand, means demand facing the firm, but that's the demand for it. And then there's marginal cost. So it looks like this would be the equilibrium in the marketplace. It's demand and supply intersecting. Remember, supply was the sum of marginal cost of the firms. This is the demand facing the firms. So it looks like the market would lead us to this point of efficiency. But we know the firm is going to operate where marginal revenue just equals marginal cost. They're going to operate at this QM. They're not going to operate out there. So there is a potential efficiency loss because these units that are right here are valued by the buyers more than the cost of production. And so they're not being produced. So this is a potential gain from trade that's in fact not taking place. It looks like there's this efficiency loss relative to the marketplace. In some countries of the world, there are absolute monopolies, and they are usually in dictatorships, and they're usually protected by tariffs to keep competition out. And they do make monopoly profits. Like Indonesia, it was Jakarta, no, that's the city. I can't remember the guy's name, but he gave the monopoly to manufacture automobiles to his brother. Indonesians don't know anything about how to manufacture automobiles. They'd never manufactured automobiles. So he hired people and brought them in and stuff, and then they built a plant and they started producing domestic automobiles that were terrible. And then he put a tariff of like $30,000 on a $30,000 car. So if you wanted to buy a Ford or something, you had to pay $60,000 or the equivalent of it. So clearly there's a problem with an efficiency loss in some cases, in some situations where there are monopolies. But it's not always the case. And next week I'm going to talk about some alternative pricing techniques which allows you to produce those units. It's called price discrimination. If you can price discriminate, which means different prices to different buyers, then you can produce those units and make a positive profit, eliminating the, quote, efficiency loss. But that is the area that's talked about. And by the way, this goes back to what I was talking to you about. The market takes you all the way out to the intersection of demand and supply. That means it maximizes gains from trade, right? The gains from trade are the difference between the value to buyer and the cost to society. The price line splits it up. So the consumers get the area above that, consumer surplus value. The producer gets the area of the price minus his marginal cost, that is producer surplus value. So the market would take us out, if this were the right marginal cost curve, the market would take us out to that level. However, that marginal cost curve comes from the way this firm is currently producing. You know, how big a plant they've decided on and so forth. And one of the solutions under the antitrust laws when a firm is monopolizing and charging, quote, monopoly prices is to break the firm up into smaller firms, make them compete, and then we'll get closer to the competitive result. Everybody with me, right? The idea was, in fact, Microsoft was sued by Sun and a couple other firms for monopolizing the market for browsers on the computer. Microsoft clearly had monopoly power in the operating systems, but Microsoft was saying to its customers, which are all the PC manufacturers, right? I'll sell you the operating system, which you can then load on your computer, and you pay me a price for each unit that you sell that has it on there. Only if you agree not to put an icon on the screen for any browser other than Internet Explorer. Everybody know what I'm saying? You know, when you buy a machine, there's all kinds of icons of things you can get. And they were saying, no, only if you don't put any competitors' icons on the screen. Well, that's called extending monopoly power, and that's illegal under the antitrust laws if you have the size of market that they did. So they were sued for violation of that, and it went to court, and the judge was considering breaking them up into two firms. That is an operating system firm and an applications firm. And that can be done. And all transactions have to be arm's length, like it was in the marketplace. And communication stops except for communication that's monitored, and so forth. So they actually were considering breaking it up. Well, if you break it up, they don't have the same cost curve. Let me give you an example. Suppose you have one firm making and selling 1,000 cars per month. And it's, let's say it's Toyota, and that's out of the Maryville, Ohio plant, which is this gigantic plant. It's big as 3 city blocks. So they're now producing with that. So the marginal cost curve is from that plant that they have, the really big plant. You come along and say, well, you're charging monopoly prices, so we're going to break you up into 10 separate firms. Well, now think about it. If you create 10 firms to replace this firm, and the market will support a total of 1,000 cars purchased per month, then, and these guys produce very similar cars, so each firm would end up producing 100 cars a month, which means they'd have to produce with a much smaller plant. They don't need this gigantic plant. But a much smaller plant, we know, is more expensive. And the reason I know it is, if the small plant were better, then Toyota would have a bunch of small plants. But they don't. They have a really big plant, economies of scale in production. So breaking it up is not the right answer, because if you break it up, they will not have that marginal cost curve. You could get an industry supply that's the sum of their marginal costs, but it could easily intersect demand up here, meaning prices much higher than they are right now. So that's the second reason why there may not be an efficiency loss. Leanne?
I don't really know how to ask this, but for efficiency loss, is that a company's profit
No.
in a way? Or like not exactly, but companies.
No, it's totally different. It's a welfare analysis of the society's loss. Okay, it's not profit that they're getting. Profit would be average cost, right,
Yeah.
and then price and so forth. But that is being done from this welfare analysis, that the height of demand is the value to the buyers, the height of the supply, the cost curve is marginal cost. And so those units, if you produce them, would generate this much value to somebody, if you could do it, and they pay this price for it, and the cost is only this much. So that's the gain from trade that is not happening now because you're restricting output to here. You with me? It's a gain from trade that you're not getting because they're restricting output. When you hear people talk about monopolies, they will often say to you, monopolies restrict output and raise price. Monopolies, and they do, from what would appear to be the competitive result. But it doesn't guarantee profitability, as I said before. Good. So we might then look at why some firms have monopoly power. What are the sources of a firm having market power or having monopoly power? Well, the first example is called a natural monopoly, and that is there are some markets that will not support more than one firm. If you think about the local power company, there's only one local power company. If you think about the local gas company, there's only one gas company. And the reason is that they have, and the same thing with the water company, They each have what's called a natural monopoly, and that is the market will only support one firm. Think about the example. Thousand Oaks is about to be built. They're going to build 10,000 homes, and they want somebody to come in and provide power to them. So there's PG&E in LA, and then there's Southern California Edison down in San Diego. They're both separate power companies. So they would go in and look at it, and number one, think of the cost of setting up your system. Number one, you have to wire the entire city. And in Thousand Oaks, they said it has to go underground. So you had to dig trenches and cable your electric wires to the entire city. You had to build transformers to step down the power from the high tension lines down to residential. You had to run individual lines from your grid out to each house. You had to install meters on each house, right? So the fixed cost is really big to start out in business, right? Once you have done that, and by the way you'd figure out whether it's worthwhile doing or not, you'd figure out what is the average income going to be for the kind of houses you're building, for the sales price that you're going to get. Then what is the average electrical usage of houses like that, and most of them have kids, and so you can project the annual usage by the city. And then you'd think about what's the revenue stream if I charge a standard competitive price, which I'm being regulated by the state to charge. And then if the stream of money coming back in is more valuable when we measure the value today than the cost of putting up the wiring today, then it's worth going into, right? Then it's semi-profitable in that way. But here's the point. Once one company has done that, another company's not going to come along and rewire the whole city and offer electricity, because think about it. Electricity is totally fungible, right? It comes from one guy or another. It doesn't matter to you. It's electricity. Perfect substitutes. And let's say they would split the market in half. So each one would get 500 houses as opposed to 1,000. But at 500 houses, neither one of them can make any money. They're not making profits. Everybody see it? Good. So that's called a natural monopoly. The market will only support one firm. Another firm will not come in and compete. Because those firms have a lot of market power, all of them are regulated within the state. And there is what's called the Public Utilities Commission, the PUC, and all of their rates have to be approved by the PUC. And so the company has to go and present their cost of information, and then why, and try and justify why they should be able to raise the rates. When nuclear power was not being insured by the federal government, and so the producer of nuclear power had ultimate responsibility for anything that went wrong at the plant, they had to put aside money to do that. And in doing that, they had to raise their rates. And so the electric companies, can pass that on to the consumers as a real cost. If I buy power from, what's the one down south? Between here and San Diego. Yeah, San Onofre's plant, then I go to the PUC and I say, look, the energy's costing me this much, 12 cents per kilowatt, and so I can raise my price in that particular way. So that's a natural monopoly. A second source of monopoly power is owning a patent over your product. And you all are familiar with the term patent. You know basically what it is. A patent is an agreement by the government to protect your specially invented idea or product for 20 years from being duplicated by somebody else. It's very easy to copy what you've done. If you bring on a microwave oven, I can take it back to the shop. I buy 10 of them. I have my engineers take them apart. They make the drawings up. They measure all the parts. And then maybe one of them I'm having trouble figuring out, but I'll figure it out pretty quickly. And then I can come back on the market with a substitute in that way. So patents were granted to firms to protect them from competition. So that doesn't sound good, right? Because they charge monopoly prices. So why would they do that? Well, the answer is because the patent gives firms an incentive to go out and find new things that are valuable to people, to invent things that are valuable. Now, when you're producing new products, it's very risky, right? The more different it is from other products, the more risky it's going to be to produce. Drug companies have patents on their new medicines, It's not 20 years, it depends. It's 7 years or 9 years, depending upon certain conditions. But to get a patent, you have to demonstrate this to the patent office. Number one, that what you're producing is unique, which means nobody else is producing it right now. It's unique. Number two, it's non-obvious. You can't patent something that anybody would see and say, yeah, let's do it that way. Draftsmen know to draw a line when we used to draw diagrams, that you pull the pencil and you rotate it, and it gives you an even graphite line in doing that. Well, you can't patent that because it's obvious, right? Plus, the third thing is it's not state of the art, and that already is state of the art. So you can't patent something everybody knows about. You can't patent it if it's obvious. You can't patent it if it's unique. You also have to demonstrate that it creates value for the buyers, that your product is doing something for the buyers that they would in fact value having done. If you meet all those criteria, then in fact you can get this protection from competition. Yeah.
So like, what does it mean like when you buy some products? I see like in the back it says product pending. What is that supposed to
Patent pending.
It's just pending?
Yeah. When you apply for a patent, it takes like 2.5 to 3 years to get that protection. And so what you do on the product is say patent pending, which means to all other people who are thinking about trying to copy your product that you've already filed a patent for this design. So don't try and copy it because it'll be a violation, right? So that's what that means. It's tragic. It's tragic that the government actually has cut back in that overall budget scheme where they reduced 10% of everybody's expenditures, all the departments. They cut back the Department of Patents. So there are fewer patent reviewers, so it takes longer to get these new products to market. And if they were brought to market, they would be producing value to the buyers. So it's another thing, government's stupid. I've been teaching you that all semester. Yeah.
What's the difference between a patent and a copyright?
I'm going to come to that next. Right. Patents are on actual products, okay? And by the way, you can't patent an idea. You can't patent an idea. It has to be an actual thing. Copyright is on things that are written, which is music and literature. And it's the same as a patent, and that is that it's a guarantee that people can't copy your book and sell it without paying you a royalty for it. So it's the same kind of protection on those two things. Trademarks are also patentable. The Exxon symbol or whatever your symbol is can be protected from somebody copying it, to give you an identity of your own. We had a case when I was doing the consulting where there was a firm in South Korea. Well, let me back up. In plumbing, there's a firm called Price Pfister. It's P-H-I-S-T-E-R, Price Pfister. And it has a very unique scroll on the products. On the packaging, it says Price Pfister, but it's really nice scroll work in the way the name is presented. A company in South Korea came out, and the name of their price was something really similar. It was like Price Fixer, or it was something that was so similar that it was clear that they were doing it in order to confuse the consumer, right? Because you think you're getting Price Pfister, and it wasn't. So Price Pfister brought an action of a violation of trademark, and we won. We represented them in the economic analysis of the amount of damages that had been done by the firm. So that's patents and copyrights. Thanks. The third is actions the firm might take, and one of them is to have a reputation that if you even come close to my product, I'm going to sue you. Now, the way it works is this. I bring an antitrust case against you for patent violation. If I can convince one federal judge, that's all I need is one judge, to say this case has merit, then you have to cease and desist what you're doing until such time as it's proven in court that you're not violating the patent. Everybody see it? All I have to do is get one judge to say, yeah, that's a valid claim. I think consumers are probably confused by that. Then you have to stop selling until it can go to court. Well, hell, it doesn't go to court for 3 years. So you're really protected, for that period of time in doing that. So, so some firms have a reputation of just being really aggressive with suing people, and that itself prohibits other firms from entering, right? Because if you know, oh no, he's going to sue me, right? If you sue and win, you win your attorney's fees. If you sue and lose, you don't get compensated for your attorney's fees. So it's a real risk to sue somebody, because if you don't win, then you're out a lot of money, most likely. Good. Third is what's called exclusive licensing, and that is that, as you know, for example, if you want to open a liquor store, you have to go to the state and get a license for that particular location. The state has a geographic rule, depending upon the density of the population, that if they already have liquor stores that are, like 20 miles apart or 10 miles apart, you can't get a license in that area, right? So the license gives you monopoly power in that local market, because the exclusive license prohibits other firms from entering into competition in your particular area. A third is called bundling, and that is tying together two products, as in the case I mentioned with Microsoft, and only selling them as a bundle, only selling them as one product. So if you want to get A, you have to get B. And if you want to get B, you have to buy A. And that is a way of extending monopoly power into an area by requiring that if you buy my product in the big area where I have the market power, then you can buy the other product. Otherwise, you're not able to. So those are all actions the firms might take to generate the ability to create a monopoly power. Doesn't mean profits, but it does mean market power. So what are some of the solutions to this problem? The first is the government has lots of regulations on prices. If you're charging a single price, well, you're not allowed to charge different prices to different people just at whim. Now, if you have different costs of servicing them, you can charge different prices. But you can't just see you come in a coat and tie and say, well, here's your menu, right? And then you come in shorts, and I don't let you in shorts, but here's your menu. You can't just price discriminate based on stuff like that. So there are regulations about pricing, and then in 1890 we passed the Sherman Antitrust Act. That broke up these major trusts of firms. Like all the railroads were in one big trust, and so they were able to fix prices on rail transportation. That's illegal after that law. And then in 1936 we passed the Robinson-Patman Act, and that again had specific behaviors depending upon your size in the market of what you're allowed to do and what you're not allowed to do.
Excuse me, that was 1936, and which act was that?
Robinson-Patman.
Thank you.
Suppose you have 35% market power, and a new firm comes in competition. If you have above 35% market share, new firm comes in competition with you. You're not allowed to lower your price below your own cost of production. You're not allowed to drive this guy out by just selling it at a loss to get him out of the market and then raise the prices back up. If you only have 5% market share, I don't care what you do, right? It doesn't matter. Sara Lee was sued by a guy in San Diego who came up with some new frozen fruit pies. And they had, like, it was apple, but he had like cinnamon on them and some other really good stuff. And Sara Lee is a big maker of, in the dessert section, right? They make all these frozen cherries and apple pies and all that kind of stuff. So this guy opened up, and then they lowered their prices below their own cost of production. The guy sued him and won the suit. Now, you're not allowed to do that, right? So there are laws that protect people from these kinds of activities, and that is the antitrust laws. And the final solution is what we're going to talk about next week. It's called price discrimination. If I'm able to charge different prices to different customers and do it in a manner that still meets the fair requirement, then I can avoid the efficiency loss. Because as I was saying to you, I can sell those units without lowering the price to these guys. If I can lower the price to you guys, then the efficiency loss is wiped out. And the firm does not have, and it's a way, it doesn't eliminate the market power of the firm, but it eliminates the efficiency loss because those units can be produced and sold. So as we said, price discrimination, the general definition simply says different prices for different units sold. We'll talk about three kinds next week. First degree is different prices to different buyers. Second degree is different prices for different units that you buy. So your soft drinks, right? $1.10 for 10 ounces. And then for 10 cents more, you can get another 10 ounces. And that's second degree. It's also called quantity forcing. Quantity forcing, lowering the price to the same buyer on additional units purchased to move down that buyer's demand curve. Third degree is different prices to different groups of buyers based on different elasticities of demand. And I'll just give you a real quick example. Airlines. Airlines charge tremendously different prices, as you know, to different customers. How do you get the low price? How do you get the low price on airlines?
I use Google search.
What?
I use Google search.
Okay, right, and you can do that now in comparison. But who gets lower prices?
The ones who
When you
pay
book
like
when?
first,
Early.
When you book early. Good.
early bird.
Well, if you think about it, if I'm lowering the price to people who book early and raising the price to people who don't book early, I must believe that this group is elastic and this group is more inelastic. Well, what are the two reasons why people fly? One is for vacation or personal travel, right? Or going home, but I mean personal travel, right? What's the other one?
Business.
Businesses, good. Personal travel is much more elastic, right? You can fly anytime in August, right? And you can book well ahead of time to get a lower price. Business travel, number one, is paid for by the company, and so consequently the person making the flight is not going to have to pay for it, right? That makes it more inelastic. But secondly, in business, you have to be there when the meeting is called, and you may not know about it until 2 days ahead of time, right? You're in the West Coast, regional manager, they call this meeting in Chicago for 2 days from now. You have to fly 2 days from now. So the airlines change the prices based on which group they think you're in. If you're the inelastic demander, I want to raise the price to you. Elastic demander, lower the price. They even do it, again, the isolation is the same one we talked about, but if you fly and come back during the week without a weekend in between, you'll pay a higher round trip than if you book and then stay over a weekend. The reason is the businessman is not, or person, is not going to stay over the weekend, right? It's not fun for them. They want to get home. If you're going to stay over a weekend, then you're at least partly, probably mostly, a personal flyer. So they lower the price for you in that way. Hotels charge higher rates during the week and lower rates on weekends in general. Same thing, because people who are staying there during the week are probably doing it for business, and people on the weekends are doing it for fun. So we'll cover all three of those next week with lots of examples. And it's one of the areas I think is the most interesting in the course, because it really is these really clever techniques that firms have employed. Hotels have like 12 different rates for the same room on the same night. They have